Good morning to you all. My name is Bruce Langhus. I'll be giving the presentation from my wife's studio here in New Brunswick, Canada. I've been a petroleum geologist all of my adult life, which is about 100 years now. And I started out in Calgary, where I worked some extremely interesting places, and I was the last field geologist hired by Gulf Oil, and so the first 7 years of my career I spent every summer in either Alaska, the Northern Rockies, Canadian Arctic Islands, a lot of really interesting places, looking for oil, obviously. But also at one point, I found myself intimately sharing a good deal of real estate on the north slope of Alaska with a grizzly bear. And so I saw him several times and from various distances, and I got to realize that he was at home and I wasn't. And so that's a lesson that stuck with me for a long time. I remember our one of our meetings was quite delightful. I was working my way down a deep ravine with a creek in the bottom, and was looking at rocks, strangely enough, mostly at my feet, and was taking notes. And until I rounded a curve, a tight curve in the gully, and looked up to see a pair of nostrils that looked to be as big as waste paper baskets. And the very next moment, I was running probably a half a mile away from that, not quite realizing what happened. And then I talked to my assistant, and he asked me what the hell I was doing, and I said I'm not sure. But we went very carefully down the stream again until I ran into where my footprints stopped and abruptly turned around. And there were some very large bear prints that also turned around at that point and ran off. So we apparently scared each other out of our wits. So that was a real object lesson in the environment. I've had some others also. Observing the breakdown of the fishing industry in Peru is a very sad situation, and seeing the same kind of environmental and economic breakdown in Guatemala, which I'll get back to in a while, but. We're seeing the breakdown here of a number of important aspects of life, people, and I think we need to look around us and see what's going on. And part of that is climate migration, which, strangely enough, is the eighth and last session of the Great Decision program this year. And so what this first slide is out of this is the cover of the booklet put out by Great Decisions, written by Karen Jacobson. This is a good introduction to the subject, but I don't think it goes into enough gruesome detail. And so that's what I'm going to supply today. Lots of gruesomeness. But the fact is that I think that climate migration is the next big climate crisis in front of us. And it's something that we need to address today, and we need to be prepared for even worse conditions in the coming future. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. Like I said, I started out in Calgary, even though I am a genuine American. Because I, at the time, graduating from college in 1966, I found myself in the same, with the same political views as Dick Cheney, and our opinion of our at the time foreign policy in Indochina. And so some of us went to graduate school in Canada. Others of us just played the deferment game. But here we are now, and this is what it's come down to. I've been very interested in the climate situation for a long time because I've seen so many examples of this. I've been able to go to the Canadian and American Arctic for a number of times, and have seen some really unfortunate changes there that are affecting the people and the land around there. Here is my website if you want to look that up. This program today will be on my website later in the week, and I've also got a number of other things. Project that I was quite happy with was entitled. What was entitled? Intergenerational Conversations on Climate Change, and this was supported by the New Brunswick government, and it involved podcasts of me refereeing, like it says, conversations between high school students and retired people about the climate. And it was very interesting talking to everybody about that situation. So that those podcasts, there are, I think, 13 of them. They're on my website also. So take advantage of that if you wish. But anyway, for the subject at hand is climate migrants. Here are some definitions that we'll be dealing with all day today. A refugee. Should we be saying climate refugees? A refugee is fleeing danger. That's what the dictionaries say. So a climate refugee is one who is fleeing climate danger. An internal refugee flees a danger within his or her own country. And so an external refugee then would be someone who is fleeing a mortal danger and having to cross borders. In the US, the EU, and the UK, there is no legal definition of a climate refugee. So even though these two words are perfectly reasonable words, the term climate refugee is without meaning in those various countries. So we need to speak as much as we can about climate migrants. Climate migrants, of course, is a softer term. You might say that a migrant is somebody who comes to your neighborhood to pick cucumbers or raspberries in fields around your town, and then moves on after a month to assume another job picking similar things farther north. And so that's not a threatening term, a migrant, but a refugee has very different connotations, and it tends to light up our senses. What's being talked about here? Just how threatening is a migrant? But we need to come to terms with this. How, for instance, do we secure the human rights of a woman who has recently lost her family, lost her home, and lost her livelihood due to a climate catastrophe, such as a huge flood in Bangladesh, or a big fire in California, or list goes on and on. These are obviously people who have suffered a climate disaster. And how do we take care of them? That's the question for today. Here's some common climate myths. This was supplied by a friend of ours who works for the Climate Refugee Sponsor program with the Anglican Church. And so just what is she saying? The myth number one, all refugees live in camps. And the truth is that that's not right. There are a number of ways of dealing with refugees around the world. A lot of those methods of dealing with them fail. And so the refugees in their new homes or in their new home countries go into hiding. And because they go into hiding, they're extremely vulnerable to excesses. Myth number two, refugees just want better jobs in another country. And of course, most refugees begin their lives at the social assistance level because they have no life, they have no home, they frequently only have the clothes on their backs, and they don't have immediate ability to have lawful employment. And the last one, the least comfortable, refugees choose to become refugees. And the truth is, any one of us can become a refugee in an instant. And you don't have to go very far into the news the last few weeks to see the cataclysm in Turkey and Syria, to realize that refugee status is indeed open to all of us. It's an equal opportunity employer. Here are some books to help you in the next while. You can curl up with these late at night. Oops. The first is a nonfiction book called The Great Displacement, and it looks at primarily the U.S. and surrounding countries and how these people are being affected today, and what can we expect in the next little while. So, and the prediction here, global warming is likely already locked in at least 2 feet of sea level rise by 2100. That really should be 3 or 4 feet of sea level rise. And the estimates keep getting bigger and bigger because we're not bringing down the cause of global warming, which is warming of the atmosphere, which is caused by CO2, which is caused by fossil fuel burning. So, and another one that's fiction, I put this in, it's a fictionalized account of several different groups who are fleeing their own special climate catastrophes. I put the fiction in because the events aren't fictionalized, aren't fiction. They're real, they happen, but the people are fictionalized. Their conversations are fictionalized. Indeed, their personal suffering is fictionalized, but it actually applies to a great many people in the world. So Gun Island is a good one. And what did I say for the last one? The Great Displacement is also a good one. These are recent, the last year or two have been written. And of course you can find zillions of others, but these are two particularly good ones. You see it in reportage, recent reportage. This was a few days ago. Is the world ready for mass migration due to climate change? It's kind of a wake-up call. This is in the BBC. So this is another set of definitions and something that needs to be kept in mind as we discuss these different kinds of disasters. So I've got kind of a timeline here, kind of a process. You start with the event, whatever that is, on the right-hand side. There are several disaster types and several examples. Wildfire, of course, the worst example, California of last year. Cyclones, including hurricanes. And a bad one is Puerto Rico of a few years ago that damaged so much of the country and left so many people homeless. Sea level rise, of course, happening all around the world, but it seems to be most acute in our frame of reference here, the U.S., in Louisiana, where so many acres are disappearing every day simply because the sea level is rising. And so that's one thing, but also as the sea level rises, storms get worse. And so storm surges go farther and farther and farther inland, and they're able to destroy more and more land. And you all know about the problems of drought last year that affected so much of the southern plains. And it's likely that will pop up now and then in our futures. So these are the disasters. These are the examples. What's the response? And so we've got for each of these, we have a choice within our country. We're rich enough that we have some options. The option being we can reconstruct the homes of the victims and the towns that were wiped out, or we can simply call it a sacrifice zone and move everyone away to someplace higher in elevation. And so, for instance, California, a lot of those areas cannot be they can't be farmed for a great many years because the soil has just been sterilized. And so we need something else to do with those farmers. People, of course, they can perhaps rebuild their houses, but it's going to take months and months and months, and it's going to take a lot of money. Some of the people don't have that money, others do. And so that's going to be probably a combination depending upon the location, the community, whether that's a reconstruction project or whether that's a sacrifice zone that won't be occupied from now on. Same is true with sea level rise. If you've seen some of the pictures, or if you've actually been down there, there are just some heartbreaking scenes of people who have gone through hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. And they've rebuilt after the first two or three, but now they're pretty well hammered, and they're trying to decide what they're going to do next, and that's the choice here. Are they going to rebuild yet again and watch for future flooding, or are they going to move to Baton Rouge or wherever and start a new life there? Of course, it will be an entirely different sort of life, but at least they will be higher and drier. And the same thing with Southern Plains. What are these ranchers, farmers going to do after this horrendous drought that they know is not a one-off? It's not a 1,000-year drought. It's something much more intimate to them. Is it every year? Who knows? But that's the question these people will have to deal with. And of course, not everyone has the same frame of reference. A rancher can perhaps sell his land to someone else who's going to be doing something else with it. Maybe they're going to make a gigantic solar farm on it. And so it doesn't matter if it floods or if they have a drought. Matter of fact, that might be better for business. I don't know. But what I would call a subsistence farmer, rancher, who is mostly feeding his family and himself. He doesn't have very many options. He's not going to be able to buy 200 acres somewhere else in Michigan or something that has a slightly more amenable climate and may have in the next generation. So, and what do you do about the First Nations, the indigenous people, who have, if you're talking about the Cherokee, who have gone through historical problems and really horrendous situations with the Trail of Tears, et cetera, being moved around their new home here in Indian Territory. Are they going to have to move again? They're looking at a different sort of choice than am I, who and I'm just I've got a few acres and I raise pecans or whatever. I don't have the same relationship with the land that a First Nations person has. So it's a different question. Why can't I advance? There we go. Okay, a few more definitions and I'll be done with this. A local disaster is perhaps a tornado in western Oklahoma that involves just a few houses, a few farms. The local police authorities, et cetera, are able to deal with this. And so they can supply emergency housing for the few families. They can look after the livestock, et cetera, and probably make sure that homes and barns are rebuilt quickly enough, and so there's displacement, but it's short term. And the kids are still going to the same school, and the farmer perhaps has a second job so he can actually live, and so he's able to continue in that job while he's rebuilding his farm. A major disaster, on the other hand, is a large storm system that involves several counties in Oklahoma, with hundreds of victims, hundreds of farms that are flattened. Maybe something like the Moore tornado of, when was that? 93 or whenever. A grotesquely huge tornado that actually ripped up driveways. That kind of a thing that involves many homes, whatnot. The local responders aren't going to be able to manage this. There's going to have to be outside help, whether or not that's the National Guard, whether that's a big effort by the Red Cross, et cetera. People are going to have to be, they're going to have to find genuine housing some distance away from their location. And so some of these people are going to wind up being internal climate migrants, because they're going to be, it's going to be many months repairing the infrastructure, repairing their houses, et cetera, and securing funding for all of this. There's not just some ATM that you can go up to and say, I need $250,000 because my farm isn't there anymore. You have to go through a great many hoops. A little farther down the list, a catastrophe is a major hurricane that devastates large portions of several adjacent states, not just counties here, but we're talking about states. And this is something that overwhelms local, regional, state organizations. And so what's needed there? It's something they're going to have federal help here in terms of the Federal Emergency Management Administration, FEMA, or some other things, maybe the UN, maybe maybe a combination of all of these things. And there are going to be a combination, depending upon where you are, of internal and external climate migrants. And this has to be dealt with, of course, at that time. And so the Great Decision program, the last session, is dedicated to that. What we're looking at is in the future, is that the evolutionary window of climate acceptability for humans, which roughly corresponds to the 25th to the 26th degree of latitude. It's a small sandwich here of the Earth that's truly friendly to humans in terms of temperature, precipitation, soil type, et cetera, et cetera. The annual average temperatures would be something like 12 to 59 degrees. Again, a fairly narrow band. This includes India, China, Pakistan, the southern US, I guess Oklahoma, and Mexico. That's the current comfort band. But without action, hundreds of millions of people will have to leave their homes by 2050 because that comfort band is shifting north, something like a mile a day. And so in not too long a time, it's going to be well north of Oklahoma. And people are needing to adapt to that. And according to the booklet from Great Decisions, 1 to 3 billion, what's that again? 1 to 3 billion people are projected to live outside the climate conditions that have served humanity well over the past 6,000 years. 1 to 3 billion people? Does that mean that a third of the world will be Okies by 2070? Will be suddenly without a comfortable home, will have to live in air conditioning roughly every day in the summer, that it will be unhealthy. That is, it might be lethal to work outside during the day, because temperatures will be 120 to 130 degrees during the day. You can't mow your lawn when it's 130 degrees. So that means you do it at night or very early in the morning, or you have a big lawnmower with an air conditioner in it. This is difficult. And what does that mean for your livelihood? If you can't work outside, there's certain jobs that you can't perform. You can't be a landscape tech because it's too hot outside. So these are things that need to be looked at, need to be thought about, need to be discussed. And of course, the global population at this point is still growing. The population of Africa set to almost triple. This means that there are going to be more people outside of that livable band of the earth. A greater number of people will also need food, water, power, housing, resources, as these things become even harder and more expensive to provide. Here's the bullseye of the famine and the hunger and the suffering that we're talking about is the Horn of Africa. That's it there in the circle. A close-up of that shows all of these countries, and those that are the areas that are shown in red is that people are starving, people are dying of both. In this case, it's both drought and hunger. And it crosses the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden into the country of Yemen. And of course, all of these areas, because resources are extremely short, water especially, but arable land also, all of these things are extremely short. And so you have conflict of the people who have lived on that land for generations and people who have wanted to live on that land for generations, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got armed conflict going on around Ethiopia, around Somalia, all of these, and especially in Yemen. All of these places are really unfortunate to live in, with the extremely high rates of mortality. There's no other way to put it. These bands of crisis to emergency to deadly famine tend to move from year to year, but this is the general area. That's what we need to worry about most. Getting a little bit closer to home, this is the Latin America, Caribbean area that is subject to food insecurity because of drought and storms. And you see that it involves an area between Guatemala and Nicaragua, and that it also includes Haiti. Surprising fact, Haiti is the biggest country in the Latin America, Caribbean. It has the most people in it. And it is now, I don't know how people live there with such an abundance of hurricanes, earthquakes, famine, and essentially no government. What's to be done there? And I wish I knew. Another look at something closer to home, and this is from the book, The Great Displacement, that I recommended to you. And it's talking, looking at the details of U.S. climate migrants and how they're existing. So this is an article in Bloomberg. You can look it up there, or you can read the book, the portion in the book. And this is going on now. It's not something that's going to happen in 2070. It's now. And it has to be dealt with. These people in the photograph are escaping their flooded home in Barataria, Louisiana, down in the Delta. An example of the problems that migrants suffer, not just hunger, but this is from just the weekend. This photograph of 340 migrants. They were genuine migrants, mostly from the area of Latin America that we were looking at a few slides ago: Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, or Ecuador. I'm sorry, Ecuador. They're migrants who have moved into Mexico, largely on their way to the United States, but they were intercepted in Mexico by entrepreneurs who they didn't brand them, luckily, but they made them wear the little bracelets like you get in the hospital, showing that they belonged to a certain cartel, and they were being used as farm workers. They were rescued by some safety organization, either police or the National Guard, or the whatever they call the National Guard in Mexico. They were rescued from a trailer that had been abandoned along the road. There are 340 of them in this trailer without air conditioning. Luckily, it wasn't summer, but the trailer had a second floor put in, just like you're transporting chickens or pigs to market, except these were people, and over 100 were minors. That's kids, and they were being used as farm labor. Are they actually slaves? Of course they are. How else would you define that? Their lives are completely owned by the cartel who's running this industry, and that's because migrants who are coming up from, say, Guatemala to Mexico have very few rights. They're not being allowed refugee status within Mexico, and so they're essentially statusless. They have no protection. So here's a modern slave. This is generalized all over the world. Modern slavery map, 2018. Couldn't find a newer one. But the figures here are pretty staggering anyway. In the United States and Mexico, there are between 500,000 and 1 million of these slaves, and they're working, essentially working outside, working jobs that no one else wants. They're certainly not getting paid for it. So they're probably being given very rudimentary food and water and some sort of shelter. You can see that there are giant numbers, even bigger. China, between 1 million and 5 million. India, even more. Over 5 million people in India are living as slaves. Not something to be proud of. Needs to be something done about this. The new asylum bill. Here's somebody doing something about it. In Great Britain, they're about to pass a law against illegal migration, and of course they essentially say any refugee is illegal, and so they lock them up as soon as they get into the apprehended at the shore, and as soon as they're shipped off to somewhere else. Some of them are going to be shipped off to Uganda. And this is not good. This is not good. The UN High Commissioner of Refugees, UNHCR, has said that this is a clear breach of international law, the law that the British Parliament is considering right now, and this would be a refusal of the past history of the United Kingdom on the subject of refugees. The United Kingdom was one of the founders of the refugee treaty of 1950. A lot of refugees at that time, a little bit different sort of situation, but huge number of refugees at the time. And the UK was one of the leaders in putting together a treaty that was approved widely, certainly by the United States, to protect migrants, or refugees, I should say. Another, this is coming from a consortium of big insurance companies, global insurance companies, including that calls themselves the Zurich Group. And they're also trying to wake up people about climate migrants. And the title here should grab us. There could be 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. 2050? That's 27 years from now. Here's what you need to know about it. And so it's saying extreme weather, rising seas, damaged ecosystem could threaten the lives of billions of people. And of course, they're saying could be, because if the world turned around today and mended its ways and stopped burning fossil fuels, we would slow down climate change. We would slow down the destruction of ecosystems. Is that going to happen? We can hope. We can hope. So there's this, you might have noticed, I referred to it several times, of this yoke of human suffering, armed conflict, and climate crises. Where does one stop and the other begin? The domino effect was felt most acutely in Syria in the last few years. The desertification of formerly fertile farming land due to climate change between 2006 and 2010 meant crop yields plummeted across the country. 800,000 people, almost 1 million people, lost their income, that is, lost their livelihood. And 85% of the country's livestock died. As a common saying in the Middle East, once the camels die, it's over. Everyone dies. And as people lost their livelihoods, food prices soared, and 1.5 million rural workers, farmers, moved to the cities to find jobs. Those left behind, either by choice or by necessity, they couldn't afford to move, were an easy target for recruiters from the Islamic State. Imagine that. The result was a conflict, a civil war, that fueled the world's worst climate crisis in decades, with around 6.6 million Syrians, that's a quarter of their population, forced to flee their country. A quarter of the people forced out of the country due to this combination of climate crises causing essentially their farmland to turn into a desert, and the recruitment into armed conflict. Here's the report of the latest report from the White House, and it's quite a it's an eye opener. It maybe doesn't go far enough, but it goes a ways. Let me find my notes here. What? So, and it's the first sign that recognizes that the White House recognizes the link between climate disasters and migration. Are we ready now to change to agree with the existence of climate refugees? Is that what we're looking at? This is really quite an interesting report that the White House put out. Talks about geopolitical implications, global political and economic security dynamics of climate-related migration, the relationship between climate migration climate change and conflict, just what we're talking about. The impacts of climate change related migration and political instability. Another issue that maybe doesn't involve active armed conflict, but political instability on a broad scale. Something that that causes the teetering of a currently democratic country into chaos. And it talks about non-state armed actors and climate change related migration. So what we were talking about before, migrants being easy pickings for the Islamic State warriors. And also maligned state actors and climate-related migration. So this is not armed insurrectionists, but entrepreneurs trying to put together chain gangs and slave workers within countries where these never existed. And if you have a great many climate migrants with very few rights, very few options, then you've got the ability to recruit these people to become slaves and do your work for you, and you reap the benefits of having these people work, and they have no recourse. The book, or the report on the impact of climate change on migration does come up with some good options, some good alternatives, some good ways of turning. Currently, the United States interprets its non-return obligations, that is, sweeping migrants off the streets or away from the borders and sending them back across those borders, the way that we're threatening to do now wholesale at the Mexican border. The United States interprets its obligations strictly to the 1951 Refugee Convention and Treaty that I was referring to before, and the Convention Against Torture. It does not accept that the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which the United States is a party, includes obligations prohibiting non-return. So they have a very focused look and view of non-return, or of return of refugees. And it, unfortunately, this report does have this phrase, and it's highlighted within the book. The United States does not consider its international human rights obligations to require extending international protection to individuals fleeing the impacts of climate change. So what the White House is saying is that the United States has no obligation to protect these people at this time. We'll look at this a little bit more. We'll take a break. It's 1 o'clock. We'll take a 10-minute break and then come back, and we'll have a fist fight about what the United States should be doing. Thank you. What's that? Just telling people what they want to hear.
I don't think so.
They're saying, tell us more, tell us more. How bad is it?
Are they like crying?
No, I just see the 3 rooms. So
How many people?
I don't know, but
You're doing a really good job. I'm so proud of you. I just I'm seriously proud of you. Oh my God. You're not funny. Well, you're a little funny.
I told everybody that a third of the world is going to be Okies.
That's good. I didn't know what you said, but yeah, however you like. So anyway, I got through to Marinol, a very nice woman, and I told her I want all of my money stopped. And she said, I still receive the publications. I said, no, I want gold. And she said that order will go today. And then I said, who's the magazine? Who's the bonds? So I wrote to those guys. And then the guy that was following me last summer.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Was him. Used the word no, I wrote a letter that there was no sense in saying something like I would like to the big agency publish this egregious and to
Yeah.
they don't want to hear from me. About my money. Oh, $300 a year. A whole life. A whole life.
We can buy lots of seeds.
Seeds. More to it. Yeah. Go to a farm.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I'm curious if I can that. I mean, I'm trying the membership.
Yes.
I didn't say, started saying. So
Yes.
that combined with horror stories. Yes, it's been a great one. I got all the packets. I was just ready to start the scan. Just ready to start. Done. Seriously done.
Thank you.
I'm pretty proud of myself. I had to go, Katie, get some water. No coffee. No coffee. No coffee for you.
I'm still sucking on this decaf.
Well, saying.
That's the fan. Yeah.
It's gonna take me a long time to scan. Yeah, really good job. There's one thing I don't get, and I would change. But I would leave up that Dick Cheney thing, because I don't know what it means. I don't know what they're saying.
Ah.
And I have to think, there's a lot of people that don't get it either. So I would cut it out, or I'd re-explain it. I mean, I just, what do
Okay.
you mean? What does it mean? What do you mean?
Dick Cheney was a daft dodger also.
Well, your audience may know that, but I certainly don't. And I'm okay. But other than that, so I only give you like a 98. I'd only give you 98, not 100. 98, but the rest is so good. Oh my God.
Good.
It's so good.
Good.
So good. I have one other regret, if I may pass it on to you, that you scheduled calm
Oh,
during, should be our celebration down at the bakery. How you schedule a phone call with him? And I imagine you use the old fashioned number. You didn't give him my number.
right.
So, Leslie, or was just a coordinating, I got the link for my last presentation. And I think without bothering her, I think I can go back through the emails, because I would never have erased one from her. I think I can peel them all off.
Good on.
That's what I wrote. You're on punch. So I said, wrote her just, I said, I'm between preparing the paperwork for my taxes and listening to Bruce talk about climate refugees. God, it's awful.
Yes.
Great thing. And yeah. So I don't know why I never did this before. I never made a proper template. And so now I have one. So next year it'll just be. Oh, I know I need to ask it. And the government doesn't need to know that we sold land, bought land. How come? I don't know.
Why would they? I don't know.
So they could take some of our money.
Monet.
I don't think the sound will bother you, but if it does, just say stop, okay?
Okay. Okay.
See if anybody came back.
Nope. Looks like everybody came back, or almost everybody.
I need to be a little weird. Bruce, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
You can ask.
Can you hear me?
We have a question for you.
Yeah.
I have a question about when you mentioned that the cartel put bracelets on these people and they were classified as slaves. But why wouldn't they just cut the bracelet off right away? And we don't know, they would still be listed as slaves, but they're not.
Right, I don't know. I guess they must be getting something of value from the cartel. And that's the only thing I can think of. Because yeah, they're they're free to walk around and stuff like that. They're not chained. So, but they must be getting something.
They get to work in the US if they can get by all the requirements. I mean, we
They
don't
could.
slaves.
They were working in Mexico.
Yeah.
Just like this, two people. I just can't understand.
I think that's it. Does anyone else have questions in Stillwater? OKC?
Not in OKC, we're good.
Oh, I think we're all right then, Bruce.
Okay, we'll go on. The first half of the talk, I'm sure, as you've noticed, was all pretty much all gloom and doom. I applaud you all for listening and not opening a vein somewhere. Because what I'll do now is suggest some ways forward that are aimed at alleviating this problem. The first thing is also from the White House report, and it's talking about a way of granting status to migrants, and especially to climate migrants. And it talks about the Regional Conference on Migration, or the RCM, a regional process that includes 11 permanent countries in North and Central America. I think that about covers most of the countries in those areas. And in 2016, the United States demonstrated leadership on climate displacement by publicly endorsing the RCM agreement. And it says, the RCM guide supports the exercise of discretion on humanitarian grounds as provided for under migration law and is based on existing best practices. The RCM is a product of the Nansen Initiative. This is the Nansen Initiative. This is a multinational NGO that works with migration, with migrants around the world. And one of its big pushes is to come up with a citizenship possibility for migrants who are paperless, statusless, which includes most of the climate migrants. It's largely a combination of Norwegian and Swiss workers and politicians and leaders. And they've come up with an effective practices guide on admission and stay for persons moving across borders in the context of disasters. This can be a number of different kinds of disasters, as we're talking about. One of the first things to do for the migrants is to supply documentation. At the close of World War II, this was accomplished by the UN, who was just very new then, with the Nansen passport. And this was something that that the UN put together with and supplied the personnel and the for at their UN refugee centers throughout Europe, where people coming out of what was Nazi Germany and the Nazi war effort, those efforts were now streaming across Europe, didn't have documentation, or a lot of them didn't. And this was supplying UN citizenship through this Nansen passport. And it allowed people then to go to whatever country that was signatory to the UN, for example, the United States, and have the ability to get considered for residency. This was a big help to a great many people, and of course there were millions of people circulating around Europe who did not have documentation. And what the UN is proposing now is the same kind of situation by having documentation centers, this time around the world, that can be authorized to supply passports to paperless refugees with standard information such as name, place of registration, photographs, fingerprints, and further. The refugees are then able to apply for aid and immigrant status by way of the UN citizenship in various countries who are part of the UN. So this is were this to happen, it would be a big advantage to all refugees, and especially to climate migrants, who would then be able to pursue better lives. And would give them protection, certain amount of protection from the UN, from the various cartels and bad actors around the world who are scooping up people to act as slaves or to become slaves. And as the UN reports, for some people, such as those born in refugee camps, lacking papers, or citizens of small island states that will cease to exist soon in this century, UN citizenship may well be their only access to international recognition and assistance, even though citizenship is a basic human right. As well as this multinational NGO, you have the Mayor's Migration Council is a group of some 20 plus states, and the mayors from those states who are petitioning the federal government to act on the to the benefit of climate migrants. And this is worth, there's the URL to get to get a look at this multi-page document that was sent to Joe Biden in 2021, calling for specific help. And I'm reading from it now. We request the agencies responsible for the report to actively engage U.S. mayors and municipalities in its development process and partner with localities in proactively preparing for the reception and inclusion of those who move for climate-related reasons. And of course, it's saying this about internal migration as well as external migration, migrants coming from outside the country. And lastly, to apply a local lens to U.S. foreign assistance priorities. In other words, the mayors are asking for federal attention to the problems of American states and American cities dealing with climate migrants, climate refugees, whatever you want to call them, and how best to deal with these people, how best to preserve their rights, and how best to settle them into new conditions. And it sums up by saying, within the United States, it's estimated that up to 13 million people could be displaced from submerged coastlines by the end of the century. Remember, the end of the century is only, 77 years away. Many of whom will move towards economic centers like our cities. Are we ready to see Chicago grow to the size of Calcutta? St. Louis grow to the size of Beijing because of the flood of migrants away from places like southern Louisiana that's slowly but surely disappearing. And it says a national carbon neutrality plan is essential to mitigate future climate migration impacts, and we welcome your pledge to reach net zero emissions by 2050. This is the Council of Mayors. And of course, there's quite a number of things that the council is looking for. Here's just a few factoids, and I'm not sure what all this means, but it's a way of looking at these big numbers that are really incomprehensible. Since February of 2020, approximately 110,000 Ukrainian refugees have arrived in the U.S. out of the approximately 6.6 million refugees leaving Ukraine in the past year. So that we've gotten 110,000 of those refugees within the United States. The U.S. aid to Ukraine, says the Council on Foreign Relations, the total U.S. aid is $76.8 billion up to January 15th. Of that, the humanitarian aid is at 3.9 million. This is just from the United States now. At the same time, 3 million US residents lost their homes to climate disasters in 2022. The 2022 total budget for FEMA was 16.8 billion. So that's what we're looking at here. These are big numbers, whether you're talking about Ukrainian refugees, US climate migrants, and the money involved in caring for these people. I'm certainly not saying that we shouldn't be spending money on the defense of Ukraine or in the care of Ukrainian refugees, but I'm saying we also need to be looking after US residents who are being shoved out of their homes by fires, floods, storms, to an equal degree. This I'm going to close the talk with this picture, which is really one of the most poignant I've seen dealing with climate refugees. There's a photograph of Mary Louise Lacoban, who is 6 years old. 6. Sits on a fallen tree beside the remnants of her family's home, destroyed by Hurricane Ida in September 21. This is in Dulac, Louisiana, which is a small community made up of American Indians and local Louisiana people. It's about 15 miles south of Houma. So it's in the swamp. It's in the lowlands here. And so the sea level, the mean sea level, is creeping slowly towards her house. And also, if any storms move into the Gulf towards Louisiana, they're getting hit by storm surge. This particular girl has already lived through 12 major storms. That is actual hurricanes and tropical storms, not quite hurricanes. She's 6 years old. She's lived through 12 major storms. I don't know what that means. I don't know. Questions for discussion. My favorite part. Okay, question number 1. Many individuals trying to locate from climate disaster simply cannot afford to. Very simple statement. They can't afford to. They can't afford to move. What role can state and federal governments play in assisting internal climate refugees? These people are Americans. They're internal refugees. What role can government play? What is the role of federal government in assisting foreign climate migrants, either in our own country or on their own shore, either in their own countries or on our shores? What does our federal government owe to foreign climate refugees? Anybody have anything to say?
You can speak up too and he'll hear you.
We're in debt $30 trillion and can only pay, what, 10 million toward our interest on the loans. Every border to the United States is open now.
Yeah,
I think we're gonna feel it disastrously.
I think so. This, the climate disasters and the migrants caused by those climate disasters are only one of several things facing Western countries and the United States in the coming years. There's going to be some it's going to be some tight times coming up, I think.
I'm not sure we're getting identifications on all these people coming in, picture of them and fingerprints and a name. I'm not sure we're getting that.
No, I don't think we are. I think a lot of people, if they don't have papers, are being held for are being incarcerated for a very long time until that's sorted out. So the UN passport would be a way around that, of documenting these people. Now, I'm not saying, and neither is the UN, that this is then a free pass, a free get out of jail pass. It just means that these people are now identified, and that if the United States or if Canada wants to accept these people as residents, as immigrants, then they will go through their normal vetting process of determining who these, where these people came from, what their history has been, et cetera, et cetera. But the UN identification is a way to supply documentation to these people. It's not, like I say, it's not a free pass.
The real question is domestic versus international question. How do we prioritize? What about our domestic problems?
Yeah. We certainly do have domestic problems, and we're going to have more as the century goes on. But, and I'll get to that. What do we do with foreign people who are, through no fault of their own, are suffering unimaginable lives?
But there are also problems in the US with people who come into the country across the border and do have family in this country, and sometimes they'll still wait years for the US to connect them to their families who might be able to help them get in. They are stymieing their entrances that way also.
Yes, indeed. And yeah, that this isn't going to heal all of the problems in the with immigrants coming in. Certainly not. The United States has to beef up their ability to handle immigrants. Definitely. But they don't seem to be having the same problems with the Ukrainian refugees. Thank goodness. Of course, most of these people, most of the Ukrainians coming across the border have full documentation, have histories, and they have a home country that the U.S. Immigration Department can get a hold of and say, what about this Bruce Langhus character? What does his arrest record look like, etc. So yeah, they've got they certainly do have more of a paper trail than somebody from Bangladesh whose farm was wiped away. They don't have any documentation, and there's probably not much of a government that they can that the U.S. Immigration Department can get a hold of. So yeah, it's a big problem, no doubt.
I have heard that there are more Mexican residents coming through the Canadian border now than Mexico. Is that a true fact?
I don't think so. There is a bit of migration coming from Canada going into the United States, but it's not very large. I think most of it is middle class and wealthy people from China, and China being including Hong Kong, who are have entered Canada and are moving to the United States. But then again, that's a whole different kind of an immigrant. But I think that's what the bulk of the people represented are. I know that Canada is getting a number of immigrants coming up through New York State who are largely Latin Americans. I'm not sure how they got into the United States. I don't know, but they're winding up in Canada, either because they have friends, family here, or they've heard good things about the country or whatever. But I know that's true. There's a big flux of people coming from New York to Canada. But again, a big flux means, 20,000 people a year. That's a drop in the ocean. So
On your second thing there, the wealthy individuals, are you talking about the World Economic Forum? All the billionaires and trillionaires that go to Davos, Switzerland from the United States?
I don't know what I'm talking about. Of course, all of us in these three rooms are wealthy in terms of the world's population. And certainly the United States is a very wealthy country. And because of that, the country has the ability to take care of ourselves in terms of some climate crises. And so we're able to do some things proactively. Not everything, but certainly we can. But how do we convince the world that that we need to change our habits to help climate change around the world? And of course, I mean by that, burning fossil fuels. That needs to be drummed into our psyches and to our attention. And I don't know how you do that. Let's go on to the third question. Indigenous people in our country. And so Louisiana tribes, the Inuit used to be called Eskimos in Alaska, the Navajo and Hopi in Arizona. They're all feeling disproportionately the suffering from climate change. So the Louisiana natives down near the Delta, as I mentioned before, are being hit by all of these hurricanes and almost hurricanes just by day-to-day rise in sea level, because the ground is sinking, because we've shut off the flooding by the Mississippi, which used to bring down silt and mud. And so it helped build up the land. We've shut that off. And so now the land is sinking and you've got tremendous erosion. And so the state of Louisiana looks nothing like what its map picture is. There's very little land down there south of New Orleans. There are some high spots, but most of it is pretty damp. It's not good. And so what do you do with those tribes who have lived there for hundreds, thousands of years? There's in that book, whatever that was now, the nonfiction book, there are stories about some of the tribes there, some of the people who used to live in or have always lived in these houses there within the swamp. They live a foot or so above the sea level. And so they're able to grow a great many crops, feed themselves, feed their families, feed their friends on this lush land that has, of course, plenty of water. And now people come to visit them, and the house is still there, but it's surrounded by water now. And the people are there on their deck, and they're looking out over their land, and they're seeing dolphins swim by in the salt water where they used to have their vegetable gardens. That's a big change, big change. With the Inuits of Alaska, their land is disappearing into the either the Arctic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, because the climate change is thawing out their bedrock, which is permafrost. Well, the permafrost isn't all that perma. When you've got hot weather, it dissolves the top few feet, which essentially turns to deer guts. And so your house slides away into the ocean. And so you then have to rebuild your house or move your house a few feet inland, and you'll be good for another year. Or you get somebody to pay to rebuild it several miles inland, so that you can still pursue your livelihood, which is hunting and fishing, but your house is a little more is fairly safe. But this cost a lot of money, and the state and federal government are paying for some of this to be done, but it's an extremely difficult, drawn out process. And the Hopi and Navajo of Arizona, where they've gone through several years of a disastrous drought in which they can't grow anything there. So they're having to be supported 100% by the tribe, by the federal government. They're deeply affected, but they're rarely given a voice in the climate decisions. The decisions being reconstruct or sacrifice. And the FEMA, which is charged with helping these folks, frequently don't bother talking to people who are actually being affected. So how should we provide a meaningful dialogue between the First Nations and state and federal governments? That needs to be something worked on all across the country. there's an obligation here of treating these people according to their treaty rights. They have certain rights and responsibilities that are laid out in historic documents that we can't just stick in a drawer someplace and forget about. Here in Oklahoma, there are a number of problems here that need to be, and it's a daily item in the news that that some First Nation has filed suit against the state or against the feds about the circumvention of its treaty rights. Do we just depend on the courts and make the tribes sue the governments to get heard? That doesn't seem like a good way to do it. How should Oklahoma be acting here? It is definitely a challenge, a real challenge of how to act like a real government that's taking care of all of its citizens, all of its residents. It's something that needs to be talked about every day. And the last one, if you answer this correctly, you get an A. Does the U.S. have a moral obligation to our citizens, our neighbors, and to the world? We talk a lot as Americans, we talk about our morals, our morality, our Christianity, our various religions. We want it to work in one direction, to bring us an honorable place in the world. But I think it has another side to it. I think it brings obligations. What do you think about that? What are our moral obligations?
I think so.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I was thinking, even when you asked the first question, is that we don't probably have this legal obligation right now to the world, but we do have the moral obligation is dependent on the individual, I guess, and then we as a society, I morally feel like we have that. But then I was even just thinking, doesn't America produce the vast majority of or expend fossil fuels? And aren't we primarily responsible for creating this climate crisis? And if so, does that give us a different kind of obligation?
We're currently, I think, number 2 or number 3 in the annual contribution to greenhouse gases, behind China and or India. But in the last 100 years, we are way above every other country in the world in terms of producing just dumpster loads of carbon into the atmosphere. So in terms of a global picture, yes, we have a real obligation to correct our actions. We've known about certainly the fossil fuel industry has known about and has studied climate change since the 70s. That's 50 years ago, and they didn't do anything. I think there have been a number of academic and government scientists who have known about climate change and its cause being greenhouse gases for just as long. And we haven't done anything. We still don't doing anything. 80% of the adults in America and Canada are convinced that human activity causes increase in greenhouse gases and makes climate change worse. 80%. That's eight out of every 10 people you walk by in the mall. Think that. We don't need to do not very much education anymore. We need to get people off their butts, off that couch, and get them to do something about cutting back that that release of carbon dioxide.
Your whole talk has been focused on what governments can do. But you haven't mentioned what corporations can do. Do corporations who've caused the problem mainly have a moral obligation to change? And how do you change corporations?
Now you said a couple of dirty words there, yeah. Our corporations, we treat them like people, but they're not people. They're collections of people. Do corporations have any morality at all? And do they have a moral obligation? I don't know. But I know people have a moral obligation, whether that person is Elon Musk or whether he's Bruce Langhus out hoeing his garden. We each have a moral obligation. The United States government and its people have a huge moral obligation. But I don't know about Exxon or Ford. But I think, yes, I've been emphasizing the government's part to play in these situations because we're looking for big solutions here, not recycling plastic water bottles. We're looking at big changes in the way we do things, like burning gasoline in our cars so that we can go to Costco. That needs to change, and it is changing, strangely enough. But more change needs to happen. And what's interesting or frustrating is that there are things on the shelf that we can use right now to greatly change our output of greenhouse gases. There are, well, for one thing, you can hardly find a gasoline-powered lawnmower now. They're all electric. And that's going to affect things a lot because lawnmowers and such are dirty little machines. And this will affect that. I'm happy to see that school districts all around the continent are adding electric buses to their fleets as their fire-breathing dinosaur diesels wear out. They're replacing them with battery-powered EVs. That's really a welcome change. Not only is a diesel a fossil fuel burning vehicle, but it's a diesel vehicle, and diesels put out so much particulate matter. Just see them changing gears and you see that puff of black smoke. Well, that's particulate carbon, and it's so fine grained that it goes into your lungs so easily, and it's able to cross the air blood interface into your bloodstream. And your bloodstream happily carries those carbon particles to your heart, and strangely enough, to your brain, where it can cross that other membrane from the bloodstream to your brain cells. And it doesn't really have a big effect if you're a 78-year-old geologist. But if you're a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old child, it has a big effect. And just think, where would we least want those diesel engines operating? Oh, in a school bus. That would be the worst place for it. And so I look on the replacement of diesel buses with electric buses as a big plus. That makes my day a little bit sunnier, and I think it should make yours. And it should be talked about every time you go into McDonald's for that cup of coffee. Say something about that.
Anything else from you guys?
Any other questions?
What you doing?
Okay, Steve, Tulsa?
Okay.
Yeah, we have one more question in OKC.
I workshops where the oil industry told us that you wouldn't have a cell phone, you wouldn't have an electric car without the oil industry.
Did you guys hear that?
I didn't hear that.
If you want to,
You said.
But that's different than greenhouse
What do you
gas
mean?
coming from electricity.
Yeah.
I just, yeah, okay, just say it. I've been in workshops where the oil industry presented another side, that you wouldn't have a cell phone if you didn't have the oil. You wouldn't have an electric car. A lot of oil goes into making that. You wouldn't have a lot of things. So, I can't see that we should just get rid of the oil industry. It's two different things.
And I don't think anybody is advocating getting rid of the oil industry tomorrow or the day after. For one thing, it would be impossible to do. And for another thing, you're right. The oil business does supply a bunch of very useful and vital things. There are an awful lot of medicines that are made primarily out of petroleum products. So it's not, we're not talking about getting rid of them, just closing the door on the whole industry, but we're talking about reducing them every day. And there are certain places, certain uses for petroleum products that are much more pernicious, much more dangerous than others. And one of those things is diesel engines. We're not going to get rid of them all, but I think if we can get them out of the schoolyard, that's a big plus. If we can ban them from traveling down residential streets, that's another plus. And certainly we need, right now, we need diesel trucks to transport our foodstuffs to our local Costco. And so keep those on the freeway. Most people don't live on the freeway. So keep those on the freeway, and that would serve then as a buffer to protect our lungs and our children's lungs. But keep that in mind as you travel and as you go to work, that nobody is talking about an immediate stop, but we have to look at the uses of oil and gas and see what that's doing to our lives. That's all. Any more questions? I'd rather have some more answers, but there you go.
Talking about battery in buses, what about the battery that caught fire on a Tesla automobile? What if a battery caught on fire on a school bus?
Of course. You don't want that to happen every day, but there are school buses, there are trucks, there are cars that burn oil and diesel or gas and diesel, and they catch fire now and then. Shit happens.
Any other questions?
That's a good way to end.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Very interesting.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day. And yeah, think about some of the stuff we've been talking about today.